Part 2 of why you should never stay in a marriage or a relationship if you are in an abusive one, right? That could be emotionally, financially, mentally, physically, spiritually, any abuse. Don't stay. Get your stuff and get somewhere safe. Okay. Talk about a big misconception that I think, we have grown up believing, especially if you have been in the church life, or, maybe listening to even your grandparents, cousins, the older generations, where they took God's word of staying in the marriage literally. At what cost God would want you to stay in the said marriage? And in today's world of our marriages, I want to say half, I would say almost all of them are not or was not blessed by the Lord. So therefore, even today is so important that we don't stay in these marriages because you worried about sin, or saying that we should get divorced, just because we're bored and they pissed us off and, okay, now it's time for that. No, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if there is, abuse going on, don't stay. It's not worth it. So many people, Christians or not Christians, I don't care, their husbands are abusing them, killing them, all types of things. You need to just get somewhere safe. I wouldn't talk about it. I wouldn't say it until you have safe. You have some support to help you through this process. Somewhere along the lines, we started believing that just because we were a Christian, that we had to be like the doormat for our husband or spouse. If that person hurt us, we were just supposed to smile, forgive, and keep allowing them to hurt us. As if love means having no boundaries. But I don't believe that's what God intended. So let's think about this for a minute. If someone continuously lies to you, manipulates you, humiliates you, breaks your trust, and abuses you, and every single time that you speak up, they dismiss your feelings or promise that they will change but never actually do, and is continuously giving unlimited access, is that real love? Or is it a way to enable the bad behavior? And sometimes I think we've confused unconditional love with unconditional access. And those are definitely not the same. You can absolutely love someone, pray for them, want the very best for them, and still recognize that it's no longer a healthy situation for you to stay in. And I know that can be difficult to hear at times because many of us were taught the exact opposites. We're taught that saying no was selfish, that, creating distance meant that we were bitter. Walking away means that we didn't forgive. But forgiveness and trust are not the same neither, right? Trust is something that is rebuilt through consistent actions over time. And you can forgive somebody today and still not trust them tomorrow. And trust takes a long time to build. And once it is ruined, that is one hard thing to rebuild. And in some cases, it could be feeling impossible, depending on the situation and things like that. So, forgiving and not having the trust in somebody doesn't make you a bad Christian, doesn't make you a bad person. It actually makes you pretty wise to start thinking about things this way. If someone continuously broke into your house, you wouldn't leave the front door unlocked just because you forgave them. You would forgive and then you'd lock the door. You'd probably get more locks. And not out of hatred, but out of wisdom and protection. And sometimes boundaries are locked doors for our peace, our protection. Another thing that I hear all the time is supposed to love everyone. And I think to a certain point you can love everyone. But just because you love people, that doesn't mean that you need to keep them in your life. You can love from afar. God was compassionate. He healed people. He forgave people. He served people. But he also recognized when people had hardened hearts. And there were times that he walked away from the crowds. He didn't want to be touched. And there were times that he didn't answer against every accusation that was made against him. There were times where he withdrew to pray because even God knew the importance of stepping away to be with the Father. This tells me something incredibly important. Rest is biblical. Boundaries are biblical. Wisdom is biblical. And God never chased people who were committed to misunderstanding him. He loved them, but he did not force himself into places where his presence wasn't being received. So if God modeled healthy boundaries, why do we feel guilty for having them? Maybe back in the day, women didn't have as much freedom and choice as we do today. And we need to also remember that. So their way of doing things is not quite how we have to still do that. And we don't have to stay into situations because of that neither. Let's talk about forgiveness for a moment, because I know that this can be very confusing. And sometimes we think forgiveness is something that we don't really need to do or isn't important. But forgiveness isn't pretending something never happened. Forgiveness doesn't erase the consequences, and we don't give the consequences, okay? That is God's job. That is the karma. We don't do that. I know that we try. We like to think that we should, retaliate against somebody who hurt us, but that is not what we need to do, because let me tell you, God's way of doing things are a lot more painful than us cussing somebody out or bad mouthing them to everybody in the town, right, that you live in. So no, we don't want to do that, because then we are actually putting ourselves in jeopardy for bad karma to come back to us, because we reap what we sow, right? So we don't want to give all that bad vibes out. Forgiveness also doesn't require reconciliation. And forgiveness certainly doesn't mean that placing yourself back into an unsafe situation. Forgiveness means releasing the desire for the revenge, right? It means placing justice into God's hands instead of carrying the bitterness around. Because honestly, even after you cuss them out, do you really truly feel better about that? 10 times maybe for that moment, but the next day you're going to still wake up in pain. And it's really not going to change much. It's just going to make you look more bitter and out of control. So don't do it, okay? People may say, well, what if we do counseling and, work on reconciliation? That can be different. Reconciliation actually requires effort, a lot of work from both parties. It requires honesty, humility, repentance, change, lots of change, accountability, consistency, healing, so much. Because you know what? A lot of times when somebody's being abusive, they're doing it because they were abused in some way, right? Or they are trying to live out some type of trauma that they have gone through. And so they are trying to figure out different ways that they can manage the pain, manage their hurts. And unfortunately, hurt people can hurt people. We have to be careful with who we are accepting into our lives. We have to be careful on how fast we allow things to go, all of those things, because I think a lot of these marriages that are currently happening today are based more on lust than love, because they never had a good model of love when they were growing up. So they just think lust is love because, you don't know. So, without taking these actions that I was saying of being consistent, changing, healing, accountability for what you did, being remorseful for that action, right? And then actually holding space, that your partner holding space for you to actually be able to heal in a positive way. That isn't easy, right? And that takes a lot of time, patience, and space. Without that, then you're just going to be hurt. And you're going to live with resentment, and you are not going to be very happy. So don't reconcile unless you both are willing to do the work. Because words sound great, right? Words sound fabulous. But without those actions, backing up those words, doesn't mean anything. And without change, in all of these different areas that I mentioned, it's most likely going to be a repeat offender and hurt you even more. So beware. I'm not saying that it's all in every situation, but like I said, if it's all of these things are go under the rug and you just think like, okay, I'll forgive, but you don't do any work to do that, then you don't forgive. There's been a lot of misconception that I even, had around pain and hurt for years. Right? We think time will make things better. And time can lessen the pain, but the consequences of that pain is still living within inside of you. Like you're still not probably very trusting of that person if it was betrayal of some sort, right? And, we kind of confuse, just because we stick with it or we stay, that's actually forgiveness. Like hurt is forgiveness. And I wonder, if God is inviting you to see that difference today. Can I ask you a question? How many times have you apologized just to keep the peace in your relationship? Even when you weren't the one who actually caused the problem. How many times have you silenced yourself because speaking up always turned into an argument? How many times have you questioned your own memory because somebody is trying to convince you that you are overreacting? You're crazy. Are you sure? How many times have you accepted crumbs because you were convinced that that's all that you deserved? And if this is you, babe, I want you to hear this loud and clear. God did not create you to constantly question your self-worth. And this is exactly what has happened over the years, and it could have stemmed even from our childhood, okay? He did not create us to live in fear. He did not create us to shrink ourselves to fit into someone else's life so they can be comfortable. He created us in his image with dignity, value, purpose. And that doesn't make you better than anyone else. No. Your heart matters to him, and your safety matters to him. And I also want to speak to those of you who have, family members that are telling you, oh, but your family. As if being related to somebody somehow gives them permission to continuously wound you. Family is a gift, but family members are still responsible for how they treat one another. So being someone's daughter, son, sister, cousin doesn't mean that you have the right to mistreat them. And, you can love your family member deeply, right? While also saying, I need to take some distance right now because this relationship isn't feeling good for me. It's not giving me healthy vibes. And this isn't hatred. This is wisdom. And sometimes that space is exactly what allows healing to eventually begin. And I know this conversation can bring up a lot of emotions because maybe you're thinking, well, what if they change? Friends, let me tell you, I truly hope they do. I pray that they do for you. I pray every person who has hurt someone chooses healing, humility, and transformation. But here's what I've actually learned. You cannot build your life around someone else's potential. You cannot build it around their inconsistent patterns. Potential is inspiring. Patterns are revealing. So people can promise that they'll change 100 times, but eventually you have to ask yourself, what are their actions showing me? Because words can comfort you for a while, right? It can make you feel good. Like, yeah, things look like it can be better. But patterns really reveals the truth. Maybe today isn't about making that decision. Maybe today is simply about opening your eyes and seeing that God doesn't want you to continuously make excuses for the behaviors that has broken your heart for years. If you continuously accept this behavior, man, you become bitter, you become angry. Sometimes you can even stay stuck because you are waiting for permission. Permission from your family, permission from your church, permission from your friends, permission from the person who was actually even hurting you. But ultimately, your first responsibility is to walk closely with God, seeking his wisdom, seeking his peace and his direction, and getting somewhere safe if you are in an abusive relationship. A lot of people stay for money, stay for the kids, stay for this, stay for that. It's not a good time, but let me just tell you, don't stay for the kids because you are going to create so much more challenging aspects for your child. They're going to think that this is a healthy relationship. You're going to basically brainwash them to think that this is what they should accept. For your daughters and then for your sons, that this is how they should behave. This is how they should treat their wives. So please don't stay for the children. The children will do better through divorce than they are within the same house as the abuse is going on. And it may not look like that in the beginning, but over time things will get better. Because God is not an author of confusion. He is faithful to guide those who sincerely seek him and seek his guidance. God led me into a new season. He sees, knows, hears everything. He knows it all. So if things are falling apart in your life, accept those tower moments as your protection. Think people may support you and have your back, but if they are acting in these behaviors, then they don't love you, they don't support you, and they don't have your back. They're using you for whatever reason, financial reasons, they could be using you for sex, for a cover-up of having a family, whatever. It doesn't matter. People who are wanting to stay with you because they are allowed to do whatever they want to do without the consequences of somebody leaving them, or being showcased to the world, or whatever the case may be, right? That's why so many abusers want to stay with their partners, because they've been allowed to do it all. I can have my cake and eat it too. Why wouldn't I? And that's where we have to draw the line, not stay in these relationships. And, there's lots of divorces that are happening, and I'm not saying that I'm happy for that, right? But I also am excited that, people are no longer needing to stay in these types of relationships just because they don't have any other option. Like back in the day when women couldn't work and things like that, these women had no other options, and their family was purely against divorce, especially back in the day when this concept was very much practiced. As a lot of people are finding God again in today's world, and the church is talking about this type of stuff, I think the church did a disservice, when they didn't bring up these different things for women. And it can definitely cost you your life. So be brave, be courageous. Don't stay into situations, but also don't open your mouth neither and say, I'm leaving, I'm getting a divorce. Don't do that until, I'm not giving you legal advice or anything like that, but I'm just saying don't do that until you actually have a plan, you get somewhere, you're safe, you have money, you have things, because it's going to be very important, especially if you are a stay-at-home mom and things like that. So I hope this was helpful, and just to let you know that you are loved, you are worthy, and you deserve so much more. If you are in a relationship that is, abusive in any way, emotionally, physically, financially, spiritually, mentally, sexually, whatever that may be for you, leave. And even, people who are married and things like that can still be in a sexually abusive relationship if your partner isn't respecting your boundaries and such. Yeah, so this got a little deep, but we're gonna go. I love you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.